Calabro. I'm turning the floor over to you so we can get Ray up to the lecture.
I will be glad to take it from
Calabro's also one of our very distinguished professors. Years ago, he was the chair of the department before I was. And Gregory. I'm third in the room, right?
You're first in my heart.
I think we should do it as a team, actually. But I'm going to hand that over to you.
Deborah, thank you. Welcome to the Charles E. Chick Herbert Endowed Lecture. This actually is a bit of a special day that I want to kind of break from what I was going to say to recognize John and Joanne Locke. John was kind of original friend, good friend, and associate of Chick's for many years, and was really instrumental in the whole history and evolution of the firm. So it's particularly great to have them here and have them be also part of this the Iowa State community and now providing scholarship for your students. So particular welcome to them. And again, they're integral to really the success of the firm over the years. Chick Herbert is really the godfather of modern architecture in Iowa for those young students who may not kind of have followed this over the years. He received the very first AIA Iowa Medal of Honor ever given out, and it kind of puts him in a position. I was actually fortunate to work for Chick. He hired me actually right out of my time here as a student at Iowa State, and eventually, well, he became my mentor for sure over my career, and then ultimately a partner, in the firm. Chick built a great legacy of architecture in the state of Iowa, but particularly on this campus. The College of Design building was done by the firm as one, with the addition to the Parks Library, was in the Black Engineering Building, Alumni Hall, the Jacobson Athletic Building over in the football stadium. All of those, were buildings done by the firm, and many others on campus, and certainly many in Des Moines and around the state as well. Chick endowed this lecture because he was so motivated and moved by architecture. The top architects of the country and really the world coming into Iowa and coming in and sharing their inspiration with us, and he wanted to make sure that the students at Iowa State had that same message given to them. So this is an annual lecture that he has endowed, really for all of you. I'm certainly honored to introduce our speaker tonight, Ray Calabro, from Bolin Swinsky Jackson. The home is their Seattle office, and he's the design leader in the firm at this point. But there's actually quite a longer story that connects all of this, and that was a story really in a way of what a small and rich, wonderful community we have as architects, around the country. When I was a young architect in Iowa, looking for kind of inspiration, about architecture around the country, I heard about this firm called Bolin Swinsky Jackson in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And I think, well, that's a place similar maybe to Des Moines. And so you're looking to see a firm like that, and they were starting to get national recognition. And so I invited one of their principals, Bernie Swinsky, to come and speak. Actually, it was at AIA convention in Des Moines at that time. And he came and was delightful and inspirational and served all the purposes we want. The firm actually at that point was kind of even growing, getting a little bit more notoriety. I think at that time, maybe doing the Bill Gates house, out in Seattle. It was kind of part of their evolution and growth from Wilkes-Barre. And then, so that was the very first exposure to that firm. The next one came, I had a chance to serve on a jury with Peter Bolin, one of the other named partners in the firm. And he graciously agreed to come and speak here at Iowa State years later. And again, Peter was at the level of being recognized with the National AI Gold Medal, which is in the top individual honor that could be awarded for the National AIA. Their firm won the National AI Firm Award. And so, again, the firm was really from this small beginning back at Pennsylvania, was really beginning to mature and become a firm of note. And again, he shared his time and to speak here at Iowa State. Then 2 years ago, I was fortunate to meet another of the people from Kocimski Jackson. I had the good fortune of chairing the National AI Honor Awards Committee in architecture. And that's kind of the gold standard of architecture awards, in that you actually have to go visit all the projects that you're actually going to win actually have to be visited firsthand, by the architectural jury. But Ray, I met him at that point. Ray was a member of the jury. His ability to articulate design and convince the other jury members of what projects were worthwhile and to be recognized at this prime national program. Again, I became very impressed with his clarity and understanding and articulation of architecture at that time. And he clearly was becoming then the leader of the next generation of leaders in the firm of Kocimski Jackson. The reason I know he's part of the next generation of leaders is I have a son who is Ray's age. That's how I can tell. He's the next generation of kind of architectural leaders. But so after this original association, I became aware that there was a competition for an Expedia headquarters out in Seattle. And there was a competition, and fortunately, Ray's firm, and Ray particularly, won that competition to do the new Expedia headquarters. So I imposed upon him to work with our students during the entire semester. So they would do remote reviews and look at the work, and so really it became, they were working on this project by themselves at that same time. They were working on the project literally, and they couldn't share any of the information, but they were so gracious to overlook the shoulder of our students to see the work they were doing on literally the same project that they were working on at the time, for Expedia. And so that's one connection. The next connection is Come and Go, a local firm in Iowa, deciding that they wanted an internationally prominent architect to do their new facility in Iowa. And of course, Kocimski Jackson and again, Ray, as a participant in that process, were selected to come into Des Moines and interview for that project. They unfortunately were not selected, but just to be included and selected to be part of that, to be part of people being considered, it is certainly, first of all, got them back connected to Iowa, which is terrific, but secondarily, it was recognition of where the firm headed, how the firm had advanced. In terms of the specific recognition of the firm, the recognition is endless. I mean, the individual recognition, the group recognition, and hopefully you've read the promotion material on the firm and understand all of those things. The architecture, I will leave up to Ray to show you and discuss. But for me, it is the kind of keen sensitivity to a specific place and to the hearts and minds of people that really identifies their work, as being extraordinary. And hopefully you will understand that and share that, as he shares the work with you. So I would like to offer a very warm Iowa welcome to Ray Calabro from Kocimski Jackson.
Will I take a moment? part of this exceptional group, this lineup that you have. I mean, geez, James Timberlake, you know, Rainer DeGraff, geez, Irene Chang, I'm absolutely honored. So, thank you. It's not too much on this one. Cal, thank you for that generous introduction and for the exceptional architecture tour today. I remember when we were here 2 years ago interviewing for Come and Go, we got a kind of cursory tour of downtown, and I'm reminded of the exceptional tradition of modernism here in Iowa, and although I'm disappointed that we didn't get the Come and Go project. If you have to lose to someone, losing to Renzo is not so bad. I also wanted to say thank you to whomever arranged for the rain and the clouds today. For a Seattleite, makes me feel right at home. I'm really happy to be here. And I'm honored to be giving the Chick Herbert lecture. As Cal mentioned, we've had a long relationship between us and our firms, and have been such an admirer of the work of Chick's firm for so long, and so it means a lot, and I'm really honored and appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all tonight. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our practice, a little bit about how we make architecture. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the iconic projects that I've been involved with over the years. I'm going to show you some new work. You're getting kind of a sneak preview of a few things that haven't been published, haven't been shown to anybody yet, and then we're going to leave a little bit of time at the end for questions, because I know you will have questions. So, we think that at the core of what we do as architects is to make great places for people. And our attitude about doing that is the same, whether we are doing retail stores for a fruit company in New York City, or whether we're doing a private art gallery for one person in Honolulu, Hawaii. Buildings of great civic importance, like Seattle City Hall, or small neighborhood buildings that are enmeshed in their particular community. We are so interested in the nature of people, how they discover things, how they see, how they touch, how they play, how they gather. All these things are really rich ingredients for how you make powerful architecture. And places, of course, and how buildings relate to the land. You saw a few, I had my screensaver going, so you got a kind of sneak preview of this house in particular, which we're going to talk more about later. But how buildings respond to the sun, to the wind, to their particular place. And how things are made, which some people refer to as craft. We are so interested in the nature of materials, how they go together, what are the essence of those materials, how they're layered, how they connect. And we're interested in those in a broad spectrum of things, whether it's wood or glass and stainless steel. We don't specialize in one particular building type or one particular type of architecture. In fact, we love the diversity and embrace it. And I'll say it's not always the most efficient or profitable way to run a practice, but it is the most interesting or a way to yield a really interesting career. So everything we do is a collaboration. Okay, this is Robert, my partner, and I in our Seattle office. There are 30 of us. Our whole firm is 5 offices across the U.S., 3 in Pennsylvania, 1 in Seattle, 1 in California. And there are 180 of us total, which seems like a big firm. What I love about our practice is that we're 30 people in Seattle, so we're kind of a small to mid-sized firm, and yet we have the resources of a much larger firm behind us. Our offices are all set up very similarly in that there are no private offices. We're intensely collaborative, and that extends to the way that we're organized in our space. Robert and I have the same kind of workstation that the youngest intern does, and that's really important to us. We want to be approachable, we want to know what's going on around us in the office, and we want to be connected to everybody. So that's really important to the environment and the culture. We have a weekly design discussion pin-up, where we invite a particular project team to pin up a project or a piece of a project. and talk about it in front of the whole office. And we do this, we make it easier with beer and snacks.
Yes.
And it's important. It's a Friday night, believe me, I know it's important. And the idea is to draw upon the resources and the experience in our office to ask questions and to make those projects better. We also are quite engaged in the community. Every year we participate in something called Parking Day, where we turn a street parking space into a park for one day. And our whole office participates. You know, it's no secret, I think, probably to all of you, that we live in the land of Revit, I guess AutoCAD perhaps to some. And yet we really value the idea of conceptualizing by drawing. We think it's really important for all architects, young architects in particular, to know how to draw. And so we have a sketch club that goes out into the city a couple times a month and draws for an hour. And I think more importantly, the next day we come back and we pin up those drawings and we talk about what it was that we saw and how we communicated those things through sketching. And we love a field trip. We do a field trip out of the office to a project of ours or one of maybe a friend's every quarter. And we think it's a great way for young architects to learn about what they're doing at their desk and how that translates into the built form. So this is us on a field trip to a house we designed in Whistler, and only really dumb architects would go out onto a viewing deck with no railing to take a photo. So, hope you appreciate that. Now just a note about roots for a minute, because I think it's important. Our roots are in modernism. And this is a little house that Peter Bowling designed for his parents in Connecticut in the early 1970s, which I understand is many decades beyond most of you, were actually born. But it's an important project for us, and I think it's an important project for architects because it established threads that run through a lot of the projects in our office, and they're interesting lessons to think about. So the first is that the building sits between an evergreen forest and a deciduous one. Not in one or the other, but between them. So when you're inside the building, you experience, or actually when you approach the building and enter the building, you experience the difference in light, the difference in temperature, and those two different worlds. It also is rather deceptive on the approach, that it appears very modest, small, diminutive, even against the tapestry of the tree trunks. And yet when you approach and you move through the house, you see it changes quite radically. The end of the building has tall walls of glass that open up to the forest. It sits up on legs, on little columns that are there because a spring snowmelt drainage runs through that site. So even decades before the ideas about LEED or the word sustainability was used commonly in architecture, our firm was thinking about these things and how they make richer buildings. We were also thinking about natural ventilation, passive solar, which Cal mentioned to me today. Really interesting aspects of that particular house that have continued into other projects. And the use of materials, in this case very modest materials, industrial steel sash windows, and we very purposefully made the operable window in the center, almost like framing a piece of artwork. And it was painted red to contrast with the green of the forest. So very simple things yield very powerful and rich results. Now, I'm jumping ahead a few decades, but we became involved in designing retail stores for Apple about 15 years ago. And maybe the most famous one is the Cube on Fifth Avenue in New York City. Some of you may have even been there. It also has a really potent site. It's at the southeast corner of Central Park in the General Motors Plaza. Now, some of you may not know, but this for years was a really failed retail space. And it's a credit to Apple, I think, that they look for these sites that are quite challenging to put stores, because they know that if done well, they can yield surprising and very successful results. So the retail space is all underground. And I think we understood that one of the reasons it wasn't successful in the past was people don't really intuitively like going underground to do much of anything. So we decided that a way to encourage that was to make a very captivating object that essentially functions as a skylight. But we needed to make the descent into that space magical, and then the corresponding ascent magical as well. And how did we do that? Well, we did that with the use of structural glass. And we worked with really exceptional engineers and with the team at Apple themselves to achieve this. And this was maybe the third store that we did with Apple, so we had a little bit of a chance to experiment beforehand. But at the time, this was 2005, this was the first circular structural glass stair supported by an all-glass elevator shaft. Now, one of the terrific things about Apple as a client is that they're interested in design. You could debate, I guess, whether you like the design of their products or whether they're successful at it, but they're always interested in improving and doing more with the available technology. So when the Cube was finished in 2005, it had 18 pieces of glass per side. So the sides are about 32 feet 6 inches tall, and there were 3 panes of glass tall and 6 across, so 18 per side, right? And a few years later, with the advances in glass technology that we were seeing on other projects, they asked us to take another look at it and consider making it even more minimal. And so we were able to reduce the number of panes per side from 18 to 3. And we also were able to experiment with the fittings that hold the pieces of glass together and embed them in the laminated glass panels themselves. So the fittings are actually not exposed to the exterior or the interior space. Now, since that time, we've had an ongoing, very fruitful, excuse the pun, relationship with Apple, and the stores have taken on different typologies. So this is one that's in Palo Alto near the Stanford campus, and it takes on the character of a pavilion with a very thin stainless steel edge that cantilevers out over a structural glass wall. And more recently, on the Upper East Side, on Madison Avenue in New York, is the most recent store, which is in a former bank building, which is on a historic register. And it's an interesting challenge and a totally new type of challenge to do an Apple store in a historic building, which has its own character and level of detail. And in a way, contrasting that with Apple's aesthetic and their own products, which are quite tiny. And we're interested in all of those things. Now, at the same time that we were doing the Cube, we were hired to design a new visitor center in Grand Teton National Park, which some of you may know is one of the most visited, one of the most popular national parks. About 3.5 million people annually go through this park. Not only because it encompasses some of the most extraordinary scenery on the continent, but it has an amazing array of wildlife. And it's one of the, it's a kind of long, skinny park, so you're almost always guaranteed to see some interesting wildlife. But we were hired to do a new visitor center at the southern entrance to the park, and I think I have a pointer. But the yellow space at the bottom is the town of Jackson. And about 2/3 of the way up the page is the village of Moose, which is the southern entrance to the park. And it's part of the Snake River Valley. And most people going to Grand Teton arrive there by car. And coming to the village of Moose, you make a left turn off of the highway and you come into this little village. And the existing visitor center had been built in the 1960s. The roof had caved in 3 times because of snow loads. There was no educational material there at all, interpretive material. There were no windows. And when they took a survey of the 3 million visitors about why they stopped at the Moose Visitor Center, they said that they used the bathroom, and that was it. So we were hired to really make an inspiring building, and one that kind of encouraged people to explore the park and to be connected more to the place, more viscerally. And so when we first visited the site, it occurred to us that, well, let me back up. There's the Snake River at the bottom of the page. The building could sit between a very dense forest of spruce trees and cottonwood and a sagebrush meadow with a great view of the Tetons, right? But we also recognized that in addition to the view of the Tetons, there was this great view of the river and the forest. And recognizing that most people arrive by car, we thought it was important that they come to a place in this huge landscape that felt scaled to the human being, that as a way of welcoming them, that they were greeted by a building that felt comfortable, not just in the landscape, but also to them as people. So you see in our initial sketch, there was a courtyard that's quite ordered. That was kind of a place that people come to before you go in the building. This is important because they have busloads of people, 50, 60 people at a time that come to the park and stop at the visitor center. So it's a great place to gather beforehand. So you walk from a short distance from the parking area through the forest, which screens the building until you're almost right up against it. And then you can see it has a very low profile. And it's not until you round the corner that you see the courtyard as a kind of calm, very ordered place where you're somewhat sheltered from the view of the Tetons beyond. And that place is comfortable whether you're 3 or 4 people or whether there are 300 people there. And that was important to us too. Now the plan, one of the reasons we think the courtyard is so popular and works so well is we use the golden section as the guiding proportion and plan. And the courtyard itself is quite ordered. But once inside the building, the geometry becomes more fractured and reflects the mountains and the peaks of the Tetons themselves. And we clustered the program pieces, the National Park Service offices, the restrooms, storage rooms, a small kitchen, into boxes that sit underneath this great roof that's supported by a network of logs and blue landsingers. Another great thing about having a colonnade around the courtyard is that it provides protection from the summer sun and from the snow in the winter, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But the scale of this building feels very comfortable and feels like porches on lodges that are in and around the Jackson area. But once inside, the roof lifts up and it changes quite dramatically to a 30-foot wall of glass where the view of the Tetons is kind of represented to you. There's a large fireplace, which is kind of the psychological and physical heart of the building that greets people as you come through the door. We very specifically did not make separate rooms for the exhibits, but rather, we worked with a great firm, by the way, Ralph Applebaum Associates in New York. And they had this idea of making the exhibits like uplifts, which is the geologic process that formed the Tetons. And they create these canyons that you wander through, and yet you have the backdrop of the view of the Tetons all around you. But it was a way of making a more nuanced and I think a more seamless experience for people who are coming to learn more about the park. Now, I mentioned that the roof caved in because of snow 3 times in the previous building. So our clients were really, really, really interested in how we were going to solve that. And so we used about 65 years of climatic data and a special consultant that works only in snow to predict where the snow was going to drift in and around the building. And they mentioned to us that one of the primary reasons that the roofs leak is because the snow doesn't slide off all in one sheet, but it tends to creep very slowly and shears off a lot of the roof penetrations. So we very deliberately didn't do that, and we let the snow creep, and it dumps into the courtyard itself. And the air intakes and exhaust vents are all in the interstitial space between the upper roof and the lower roof. The building performs really well in the snow. It's been there now 8 years. I was just there 2 weeks ago. Looks fantastic. So at the same time that we were working on the Teton Visitor Center, we were hired to do a little vacation house in Golden, British Columbia, which is about an hour and a half west of Banff. And our clients came to us, and they were a really interesting couple. He's a corporate attorney, and he gave us a program that said, I need a living room that's 15 feet wide by 20 feet long. I need a dining room that's 13 feet by 18 feet. Super type A, very, very ordered. And his wife wrote us one sentence, which was, I would like the house to feel like a 1970s James Bond ski shower. So, I think it's great as an architect that you get to meet and work with so many different kinds of people. But also, the balance between the two is really interesting, right? You have to solve the programmatic requirements of a certain size of living room. But then there was this kind of freedom to think about the building in a totally different, kind of dreamlike way. So how did we solve that? Well, they have a very small site in a ski resort. It's about a quarter of an acre. And the other buildings along that street, which you can see, are very large and kind of bulky, and they almost fill the whole lot. And our clients were rather private people, and so they were interested in not doing a terribly large building, but it's a weekend house for them for skiing, and then in the summer for mountain biking. And they really wanted privacy, but they're also open to great views of the site. So we split the house into two pieces. And we made what was essentially a very dense bar on the north side of the site, which had bedrooms in it and a kitchen. And then on the south side of the site, we made a more open, almost like a shell, which held the living room and the dining room. And then between them, we made a knuckle that had the stair, and this landing for the stair provides the ski in, ski out access. And this is also a house that had to be somewhat flexible to accommodate lots of people, friends, family on the weekends. So starting on the left, on the lower level, there's a 2-car garage, a mudroom, a bathroom, and a family room that converts to sleep 4 people. Okay? On the main level, there are 2-bedroom suites that each sleep 2 people, but the window seats are the size of a single bed that can each sleep a tot. So that's 6 more for a total of 10. On the upper level, we made lofts for the kids with bunk beds, so each kid could be there and have a friend sleep over for 6 more. So you can sleep 16 people in this house comfortably, and it happens all the time. They just told me that their oldest son had his hockey team there for the weekend, and it was no problem. So it's not a very large house, it's about 3,400 square feet. But you have to think about that, right? That's an interesting challenge. So, the other thing that we had to solve was the garage door, right? So, how many of you have gone to a house before where you see the garage door is the very first thing you see? It's the largest, ugliest thing you see when you pull up into the driveway, right? Yeah, lots of it. So here, the garage door is hidden behind that plane of wood at the base, and it just tilts up like a flipper. Really simple idea, but it completely masks that there are cars below. There are also concrete walls that slice into the site that protect from the heavy snowfall. And then the entry is in that little slot between the 2 sides of the house. Now, this was a ski resort that had a mandate for a roof pitch that had to be, I think it was 5 and 12 or 4 and 12. It was 5 and 12. And we were initially bemoaning the idea of having, we don't like constraints of any kind, and when we have them, we always try to find a way to break them. And so this was an instance where it helped us because it made these lofts for the bunk beds, so that was an important thing. Now the entry between those 2 concrete walls, we were using, because this is a ski house and a weekend house, we thought about storage all the time. They have 3 small kids, they have ski boots and mittens and gloves and goggles and ski poles, and so we built storage into the bottom of the stair. We made a little bench there where they could sit and put their shoes on. Then you come up to the main level, and the living and dining room space, we designed to have opaque sides that screen the views of the neighbor. And those walls extend so that you don't see the neighboring house at all, nor what's going on in their yard. They also, the clients are of Norwegian descent, and they wanted the house to feel a little bit like a Norwegian cabin. So we used rustic materials like sheets of fir plywood to skin the inside of this volume. And then looking back the other way, you can see that it extends across the stair volume into the kitchen. And that baffle, the black visor to the left, shades from the afternoon sun, but above it you can see the peak of the snow hill, or the ski hill rather. We also extended the exterior siding into the house, which was stained black. And where you sat or where you made places, we made places that people would touch, we used clear finish wood to heighten the contrast. Now, I mentioned before that we had the opportunity to make these lofts for kids, so we designed ship's ladders with bright green handrails that can be closed off from the main space by a series of sliding doors. But the bunk beds are one of my favorite things in the house, and they love them, and now I was there with them a few weeks ago, and they have the cubbies filled with all sorts of things, Star Wars figures and books and blankets and all kinds of things. It's great. It's great to see houses performing and being lived in the way we envision. So, next I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that we just finished for Square in San Francisco. Some of you are familiar with Square, right? It was founded by Jack Dorsey. It's a tiny little white square about this big that turns your iPhone into a credit card reader. And they came to us having leased space in what was a former Bank of America data center with no windows on the floors that they had leased. So this was a building that had been designed for machines, not people. And they were interested in turning it into a workplace for one of the most rapidly growing and interesting technology companies. You can see that the floor plates are huge. They are almost 300 feet wide, and is an entire city block long. And so how do you grapple with that? These enormous, enormous floor plates that look like that. Yes, chrome, right? That's the starting point. So not all of our projects are these beautiful sites in the woods or in the mountains. So we started to think about urban planning metaphors to break down the scale of the floor plate. Starting on the left, we thought about Dubrovnik, which has this great kind of boulevard, shopping street, with places of different scale that you can sit and shop and move through. We thought about Louis Kahn's diagrams of circulation in Philadelphia, thinking about hierarchy. We also thought about plans of cities like Savannah that were planned around a series of parks that helped define those individual neighborhoods. And all three of those techniques are employed in the final result. So the image on the left is before, the image on the right is after. This is looking right down the boulevard. On the left are meeting rooms and workspaces, and on the right is a series of tables for informal conversations, loose furniture, and cabanas, which allow views out to some windows that we did add to the space, and also give some acoustic privacy to the meetings that are going on there. In each neighborhood of the plan, there's a glass enclosed meeting space, and each one is defined by a different color. In this case, the red of the Golden Gate Bridge. These are felt panels, so this project did not have a really significant budget, and the idea was to make a kind of clean aesthetic that mirrored the aesthetic of Square's products, but yet also allowed people to feel as though they were in a neighborhood as they were working. We put elements of kind of importance along that boulevard. One is the coffee bar, right? That's of great importance. And a canteen for food service. So those are located along that boulevard as well. And a library. which anchors one end. And we varied the nature and the design of those depending on the use of them. Now, one of the big challenges was they were growing so rapidly that they leased some adjacent floors. And how would we connect them without making just a fairly typical stair? How to encourage people to move up and down between those floors, and how to encourage them to work with one another in that spirit of collaboration. So we made a big stair. And this is a stair that is both a regular stair and an inhabitable one. It's a space. And perhaps the most significant thing, as you can see by the image on the right, is that it gave them a place where their entire company could gather together, which is really important when a company has 1,200 employees, right? Really important. And we also designed these really quirky little tables with legs that weren't the same length so that they sit comfortably on the stairs. And the reason for doing this was kind of twofold. One was we wanted the stairs to feel populated even when it wasn't in heavy use. And two, we wanted it to feel like you could have a laptop there, you could have a meeting, you could use it in ways that maybe most people wouldn't think of otherwise. We also made the material of the stair wood, which contrasts with the more kind of neutral colors and palette of the rest of the space. And then finally, we did another stair that connects two of the other floors to the canteen in this very odd existing building. And in this case, it's quite a different stair, but we used the same material so that it's kind of recognizable or read in the space as being a place that you go up and down and circulate between the floors. So this next project I'm particularly proud of. This was a house that I worked on in Aspen, Colorado for 5 years. So our clients came to us to design a home for them on a very small lot. But the important thing to note is that it was the last lot before the North Star Nature Preserve. And the Roaring Fork River runs through their property, and it faces south, so it gets a lot of sun in the afternoon. And you come down a long driveway through forest, and the house kind of spans between two knolls. And we decided to make the house a threshold to the view. So you approach the house from the north, and it appears very opaque. There's a base of stone, the upper level is clad in wood, and there's a black wall that slices through the house that defines the entry. And that's very important because in Aspen they don't let you put lights outside. They're part of the dark skies movement, and so, as I mentioned before, we're always trying to figure out a way to get around whatever rules or constraints there are. So in this case, we made a little light cove with an LED light, so no light shines upward, but it actually shines out, leads you to the front door, and slides all the way through the house, essentially guiding you to the entry. Now, you come in the front door, and there's a double height entry space that frames a view of the mountains beyond. And we made a stair that seemed to kind of levitate and lead you up to this upper level, but also to allow you to look through it so that views of the mountains beyond were not obscured when you were on the stair. It's kind of an interesting house and an interesting plan. The clients were in their 50s with children that had already gone to college and graduated, and they wanted the house to be flexible enough to expand to accommodate their children and their children's families for ski vacations and summer vacations, but most of the time when they were living there, it was just going to be two of them. So we zoned the house in a particular way. The lower level, which you see on the top, has the entry, has 3 children's bedrooms, an exercise room, a mudroom, and a guest suite. And the upper level has living, dining, kitchen, family room, and a master suite. So when the couple are there by themselves, they live on that second floor. And then when their family is there, they utilize the floor below. And that is the view you're rewarded with when you come onto the top of the stair. And we made the structure and the window system as minimal as possible so as to not obstruct that view. There are walls of glass that are 10 feet, 6 inches tall that slide out of the way. And both the window system and the structure are made out of stainless steel, primarily for durability in this particular climate, which is characterized as an extreme climate. Not just for snow and wind, but also for the ultraviolet rays that are up around 9,000. So the elevation here is pretty significant. And that upper level is organized as a pavilion, very simply. The fireplace is an anchor at one end, and the kitchen is an anchor at the opposite end. Walls of glass to the south, and then we carved into the wood volumes on the right-hand side to make nooks for reading and for casework storage. The stone that was used in the fireplace and in the site walls for the house is the Valls quartzite from Switzerland, made famous by Peter Zumthor in the famous baths there in Valls, Switzerland. We looked at about 40 different types of gray stone before settling on this one. It has a special quality all its own. And where there were moments, most of the palette you can see in the house is very neutral. Finishes that we use are natural. The floor is walnut with an oil finish. The walls and the ceiling are Doug fir. The stone is uncoated. And yet, where there were particular moments, like moment frame that's stiffening the end of the building behind the kitchen, we decided to get a little more playful, and we painted it this very bright purple blue. And in the stair that connects the lower level to the upper level, from the mudroom to the kind of prep kitchen area, we made that out of 1-inch thick steel plate, and we painted it a bright red. I always like to think that Ellsworth Kelly paid us a visit. But it's making the places in the house that the family is going to use the most and the most often different and special. We're often fortunate enough to design furniture for our houses. In this case, we designed the desks. One that looks out to the incredible view of the preserve, and the other that looks into a sunken court. I mentioned earlier that the house spans between two knolls, and this is the eastern end that kind of nestles into the hill there. And our clients fought us so much about this space. We don't understand why it's there. Couldn't it just be enclosed? We'll never use it. We don't like it. It's going to be dark. On and on and on. Now, of course, it's their favorite place in the house, and they send us photos of them sitting out there on the stairs, on the furniture, with the fire roaring, and they tell us how much they love it and they couldn't have lived without it. So my advice to all of you aspiring architects is to persevere when you feel really strongly about something, right? Don't give up so easily. It's important, really important. And I mentioned that the house faces south, and so we took the opportunity to tune the roof overhang to very specifically to the sun angle. And in this case, that roof overhang is about 16 feet deep, and it shades the summer sun it shades the interior of the house from the summer sun, and in the winter kind of welcomes the sun in to warm the space. It's a naturally ventilated house. There are photovoltaics on the roof that produce more energy than the house consumes. And it uses geothermal heating, geothermal wells to heat the house, so it's non-consumptive in terms of utilities. And it's a large home and an expensive one, but it's also certified LEED for homes. So I think it's important to note that where possible, we're being responsible with resources and with the design of the home itself. So at the same time that I was working on this house in Aspen, we were invited to design a new home for a company called New Skin in Provo, Utah, which some of you may know. They're a cosmetics company not unlike Avon, where they're a direct sales company. So, you know, you invite a few friends, they invite a few friends, they invite a few friends, that kind of thing. And they had for years this tall, dark blue building on the left-hand side of the image. That was the largest and the most imposing, probably the ugliest building in downtown historic Provo. And they hired us to make it bigger. Yeah. So what did we do? Well, they were also really interested in thinking about themselves as a company that had changed over 25 years, wanted to be more transparent, wanted to be more inspirational in the workplace. And so this is an image showing Center Street with the historic scale and character of the historic buildings highlighted along Center Street. And then the blue rectangle shows the site for the building. And on the right-hand side is the existing building, which is kind of had chamfered corners that face the street. It was sort of every bad move that you could make in the 1980s they made. And then our site for the new building was to the left. So we began looking at this, and under the local zoning codes, you could make a building that was 6 stories tall. So see under number 2, we could have made this giant, you know, Best Buy of a building. And yet that would have been the right thing to do there. And so we decided to make the building that was along Center Street 3 stories tall and split the program in half and put the bulk of the program towards the center of the site where you couldn't perceive it from the street. And then between those 2 buildings, we made a 4-story atrium that linked not only those 2 buildings, but linked to the existing building. And they had a program that was on the order of a small convention center. So in addition to more office space, there was a 500-seat ballroom, 150-seat auditorium, 2 cafes, a retail space, a data center, a fitness center, and 3 stories of executive offices. So it's almost like designing a small city. And what we did is we convinced them to give over the southern part of their site to be a garden at the heart of the campus. And we made our building to the north along Center Street that framed that garden. And then eventually they'll expand even further to the west, where the letter C is. That's planned future expansion. We also made a deliberate shift away from their existing building and the kind of dark blue, highly reflective glass to a lighter, more transparent set of materials. The building is shaped by its environment. So the elevations that face south have expressed sunshades that shade the inner space, deep overhangs to mitigate the intense Utah sun. And I'll talk about the ovoid penthouse in a moment. And then inside, we made a ceiling form that links the atrium to the existing building. And you know, they're an aspirational company that's about selling and distributing, and they kept using the metaphor of clouds with us. So we essentially made a cloud for the ceiling that acts as a light baffle. And I'll talk a little more about that in a moment. But here you see we organized that spine in a way that it is activated all the time. So we push the conference rooms and the meeting spaces into the atrium itself, and they cantilever from the faces of those buildings. We made a grand stair that connects all of the floors quite visibly, so and bridges that connect both sides of the atrium, so that you see people moving around in the building and working and collaborating, which is something they never had before. We also allowed the space to be flexible. This is also a company that wanted to get all 1,200 or 1,400 people that work for them together for company-wide events. And then apparently they have a dunk contest with people from the Utah Jazz that come in once a year too. So it's also a reminder, I think, that you can't always predict how your clients are going to use your building. So you have to allow for the odd at times. Now I mentioned the roof and ceiling acting as a light baffle, and the light in Utah is very different from other places, and so we used a combination of exterior roof louvers, skylights, and this etched glass panels to baffle the light and make almost a museum quality environment in the space, which you can imagine was important for a cosmetics company. And this shows in a little more detail how exactly we did that and how we zoned the space so that it would be comfortable for people on the lower floor and on the upper floor. And we used the void above the ceiling as a heat plenum to draw the warm air out of the building itself. And so it simultaneously blocks the light from directly entering the atrium, and then it's also exhausting the warm air from inside. And the south elevation I mentioned before, we used expressed sunshade to shade the interior of the offices, and they also have light shelves to bounce natural daylight onto the ceiling and make the interiors of those spaces less reliant on artificial light. This is the 500-person meeting room being used. There are 19-foot walls of glass that slide open, and one of the key aspects of this, of the design, was to allow people that are in the atrium views out into the garden to the south. So these two walls of glass on either side of that room draw you in and allow views to the landscape beyond. And the cafes do that as well. They welcome the public into the cafe, so they're connected quite directly to Center Street. Okay, so the last house I'm going to show you is one that was just completed, and it's not terribly organized, and some of the photos are of my construction photos with my iPhone, so not this one, but don't judge this too harshly. So this was our site. Really extraordinary piece of land in Jackson, Wyoming, looking north towards the Tetons across the Snake River Valley. And our clients owned this for 15 years before hiring an architect. So you can imagine that they had really strong feelings about what the house might be like, how it might be oriented. And there was an existing aspen grove off to the right, which you just see the tail of there on the right-hand side. And other than that, it's a sagebrush meadow that kind of rolls down over the hill into the valley below. And the lot was the buildable area for the lot was actually quite a ways removed from the road. And so we knew we would have a long driveway. And the ground sloped quite a bit away from you. And yet you see the mountains and you see the view the whole time you're on the driveway. And so we had this idea of choreographing the approach, which again is reminiscent of the first house that Peter did for his parents, reminiscent of Apple, the Teton Visitor Center, many of our projects, where you would come down into an aspen grove and into a courtyard, and then enter the house where the view would be represented to you. So we built models, and this was a great way of communicating with our clients what the house was going to be like. And we did about 5 models, different models for them. But you can see it's a series of masonry walls that slice into the hill and define a square courtyard or almost square courtyard. And then the house is a series of bars, parallel bars, that you pass through on your way to the view. We also remembered that you approach the house from above. So that's going to come into play here in a moment. So I'm showing the floor plan here to give you a little bit better sense of what's going on. This is the guest house here, which is a separate structure. Down the driveway into a courtyard. This is the main entry to the house here. There are 2 fireplaces that flank that entry. There's a private courtyard here, dining room, kitchen, living room, master suite, mudroom, garage, powder room, etc. And then there are more bedrooms on the lower level, which I don't have a floor plan about that, sorry. And then there's a special room here at the end of the axis that the husband asked to be his office. And he said that he wanted to feel like he was floating. He really admired the work that we do for Apple. He really wanted to feel like he was floating out of Apple. So this is the view from the approach, with the contractor's truck parked perfectly right in the center of it, as always. But as I mentioned before, you approach the house from above. So we thought that the house should have a planted roof, so that you almost don't see the volumes of the house when you approach. You see the walls that define the courtyard, and you see the chimneys that mark the kind of important axis. But the rest of the house tends to kind of dissolve into the view. So looking from the front door, you look all the way through the axis of the house out to that special room, the husband's office. These were taken before there was any furniture, so that's looking between the fireplace masses. To the right is the living room, to the left is the master suite. And that's the room itself. It cantilevers out over the edge of the site. We specifically pulled the ceiling down so you didn't see the top of the glass and the mullions, to kind of create the illusion that you were floating and that you couldn't see the edges of the space. This is the living room looking north towards the Grand Teton. So you see the ceiling is a plane of wood, the floor is a plane of wood, and then the walls are simply glass or panels of plaster. This is looking back at the fireplace in the living room. And that's that special room that cantilevers out over the wall. So this is a very, very large house. This is about 11,000 square feet. But yeah, I know. But we're very proud of the fact that it doesn't seem that large. It's a one-story building when you approach, and the second story is only revealed at the lower level. Okay, so as a favor to Cal, my friend, I'm not technically allowed to talk about the Expedia project. Counting on you all to keep a secret. Okay? Don't call them. So, as Cal mentioned, about a year and a half ago, we were invited to be part of a competition to design a new headquarters, new campus for Expedia in Seattle. And they chose one of the most extraordinary sites along the Seattle waterfront. It was almost 40 acres, largely undeveloped, that had been the previous home of a pharmaceuticals company called Antigen, and there were 4 buildings that were there, and they charged us, we were one of 3 firms, with reimagining those buildings and expanding it to accommodate as many as 10,000 people in the future into a world-class headquarters. So, a few things that distinguish us, I think, in the competition. Number one, we were the only firm that made a model. So this is one of the models that we built for the competition. And it is as long as these 2 tables together of the whole waterfront of the city of Seattle. So downtown is to the right in this image, sort of over here. This is 15th Street, 15th Avenue, which connects downtown with northern suburbs, Ballard and Wallingford, etc. And this is a cruise ship terminal and dock here. So it's a deep water dock for cruise ships that come to Seattle. And this is a working grain elevator. I know you guys know what those are. And there were existing buildings on the site. Now, our solution, we were the only firm that proposed keeping the existing buildings and reimagining them, not just raising them to the ground. So it's interesting to think about. So our scheme was guided largely by experience, the experience of approaching the campus as an employee every day. There's a flyover that allows you to come up and over 15th and arrive at this site. And we decided to plant a northwest forest here, of course, on the north part of the site that you would drive through every day on your way to work and be reminded of the fact that you're in the Northwest. we made that sequence of approach into a grand space that we called the Ring, which again, for a company that was rapidly growing with so many employees, was a grand plaza where they could gather. And this represented a new piece of construction. We kept their existing parking garage and added to it. And we kept three of their laboratory research buildings and added onto them here to the west. And then we reimagined the building that links them now into a kind of boulevard that connects the entry, what we call the nexus, with all of those workspaces. And then we thought there might be some space left over for expansion in the future. So this is the approach through the forest. And we had an idea that the best views were really from the roof of this building. And so we thought it would be a great place to have roof terraces and a running track around the whole campus. So we made a bridge that spanned between the two sides of the ring so that you could literally run all the way around as part of your daily life there. This is looking a little more at the approach at the inside of the ring. They were very interested in a transparent architecture that allowed as many of the inhabitants as possible views of the water and the mountains in Seattle. The element on the left is their existing parking garage, which we were proposing to screen with perforated metal panels. And this is a special conference room here in the middle. The cantilevers over the entry. So on the outside of the ring, and on the additions to those existing buildings, we were being very responsive to the sun exposure. There are sunshades and blades that wrap around the outside of the ring that are mitigated very precisely to shade the interior while allowing the views to be unobstructed. We enclosed the spaces between the wings to become interior atria that would be great places for people to meet and collaborate. And then we made great porches on the west side that would be outdoor spaces, the days when it's not raining in Seattle, for people to the outdoors. This is the nexus, so this is the entry space, and we thought of this as kind of the nexus of where all of the circulation, where all of the people would come together, all of the employees would come together. There's food service here, as in other places in the building. We brought landscape indoors, working with Peter Walker Partners, really terrific landscape architect from the Bay Area. And here you see the expressed frame of the existing buildings, which were all concrete, cast-in-place concrete. And we were proposing to expose that and make special conference rooms and meeting spaces that cantilevered out into the space, kind of further animating the nexus. Also, they had a great collection of transportation items, including a float plane, which we were proposing that they hang in the space to kind of remind everybody of what Expedia is all about. So I want to just end with a quote that is probably my favorite quote about us as a firm. That was part of an introduction by Ed Baum in Dallas at a talk that we gave a few years ago. But I'm going to read it, so please bear with me. Any individual or group that is this good this long has found the secret of self-renewal, a dream we all have and few of us achieve. I suspect the answer lies in a deep curiosity about the world and about architecture, curiosity about how things work, how they go together, how they communicate. Curiosity keeps us actively seeking, not just responding. Cal, you and I were chatting about this earlier today. It welcomes change and challenge as raw material for thinking and working. I don't think curiosity killed the cat at all. I think curiosity gave the cat its 9 lives. I think especially for students, and I think in some way we're all students for a long time, but I think especially for students, it's important to remember to be curious about what you're doing and not to take too many things for granted. So thank you so much for listening tonight. Yes?
You mentioned a couple of times that you try and overcome extreme or restraints that you go on your property. I'm curious what the most extreme restraint that you've been able to overcome, and was that the most creative solution?
Oh boy, right off the bat. Sure. So she said that I knew I'd regret saying that we liked breaking the rules or looking for a way to get around project constraints. What is the most extreme example of that? And is that am I getting all this right? And is that our most creative moment? Is that okay? Well, constraints are there for a reason. And some of them you can't totally ignore. But I think sometimes it involves a lot of research and a lot of thinking, and a lot of what we call elbow grease. And sometimes you can, what initially seems impossible or not permitted or unacceptable can change depending on the nature of how you look at it. And so I think what I meant by that was just that we see it as fuel for better thinking. Not so much that we're always trying to cheat, which we're not. I think the most extreme example of that is my business partner, Robert Miller, is a terribly creative guy. And we did this house in Seattle called the Envelope House, and where the height restrictions and the lot restrictions were so tight that it yielded a rather small building until he figured out that stair penthouses and bay windows were exceptions. So we made stair penthouses that had little rooms in them that was allowed, and bay windows that had reading nooks and that could fit the size of the twin bed. And so sometimes it just depends on how you think about it and looking very carefully at what all the options are. And I think that's the one where we were measuring to the inch of how big that building could be. And so I think that's kind of interesting. You really have to get into it and drill down on those things. Whether that's the most creative act, I don't know. But I think that as advice for all of you guys, I would say that the powerful moments in architecture don't come easy. Sometimes the architecture gods smile on you occasionally, but a lot of it has to do with hard work and thinking about it. No one else has a question? Yes?
So you emphasized the importance of hand drawing.
Yes.
Would you like to elaborate a little bit more and how do you sort of incorporate that as well as the visual work as well?
Sure. So the question was, I talked a little about hand drawing, and would I elaborate a little bit about that and about how that is part of our process? So that's a great question. I would say almost all of the conceptual work in the office, whether it's for a small residential project or a large, corporate campus, starts with sketching. And it might be sketching over computer drawing or sketching over a topographical drawing, but it all starts with sketching. And I think as an architect, no matter how compelling a tool the computer is, and it is a compelling tool, there's a real desire to be able, there's a need to express ideas quickly through drawing. And I can give you a really good example of that. So I showed you this project at New Skin, right? And we had we had meetings with them where the three founders were in the room, and they asked us to present on this giant TV screen. So it was all an electronic presentation. And they spent more time on their iPads than they did listening to me, and I was really irritated about that, actually. So the next time, I had the team print the pages on big sheets of paper, and I sat down at the table in the middle of them And when they had a suggestion or something, I drew on the paper. And it changed the whole discussion and changed the whole character of the meeting. All of a sudden, they were kind of sparked into making comments about things, or they were engaged in the process in a way that it was just impossible to do with me showing images like this on the screen. So sometimes you have to do that in-house with your own team, but sometimes it's a way of demonstrating to the client that we as architects have different skills and can use them. I think that's a big deal, really big deal. Another thing that kind of goes along with that is, we're not very hierarchical in our firm, which has its positives and negatives, but when we do a design review at the front table or at my desk or wherever, everybody on the team is invited to a conversation. So you could be the newest person, the youngest intern, you're working on a project, you can come to the table. We believe anybody can have a good idea. So we work very much that way. It's not just the lead designer and the project manager huddled together in a phone booth somewhere magically copying things. We really believe in collaboration, believe in the value of that. And some of the best ideas come from some of the most unexpected places and people.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, this corner has a lot of questions. Yes. From one of my mentors? Well, I can tell you a lot of Peter Bolanisms. Peter is somebody who's he's 79, he'll be 80 in March. He's still very, very, very active in the practice.
Sounds young to me.
Depends on your point of view, Cal. There are more of them than there are of us here. So, So I'll tell you some things that he's told me that I find to be very valuable. Don't be too tight. Sometimes looser buildings are better. Spend as much time as possible on the site. Don't underestimate the power of nuance in architecture. Don't draw what you know it to be. Draw how you see it in your mind. And my own advice to all of you doesn't necessarily come from Peter, but I remember when I was in school. It's not that long ago, but my advice to you is don't be afraid to take risks in your design work. Right? The stakes are low for you guys in that regard. You don't have to keep the water out. You don't have clients that are lawyers. It's true. You have an unbelievable freedom. Take advantage of it. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. And I think that's really important. It's really important. Don't be afraid to take risks. Try something. I mean, you'll hate this, but your faculty are human. They can make mistakes too. Yes?
You kind of alluded a few times in your discussion to this more or less philosophy of the path and how it kind of approaches to the building. I know every situation isn't necessarily ideal, but do you sit down and try to kind of figure that out when you go through a project, or is that just something that's kind of happened through some of this?
Well, I think there is a interesting. I mentioned earlier in the talk that we're really interested in the nature of people and what they see. Each of us sees things differently, and each of us moves differently, approaches things differently, and Peter often describes it as how you get from here to there. Whether that's at your own home, whether that's coming here to school, whether that is, we all move, most of us, during the day in some way, shape, or form. And I think, having there be a bit of a journey and revealing different things at each stage of the journey is something that we're really interested in. It would be unfortunate if, when you approach something from the beginning, you already knew everything there was to know about it and there wasn't a sense of discovery. I think in places like the Tetons or the house that I showed that's in Jackson, you know, they all have these very long roads that approach the building, and you realize that that's an opportunity. You know, your mind can kind of shut off, but it's also an opportunity to engage people in a different way. And we like doing that. We like doing that. And I think it's one of the ingredients that makes for kind of interesting architecture. Not all architects think about that. So, did I answer your question?
Anybody else?
No one else has a question? Yes, Tom. I should have said, I should have given a shout out to my friend Tom Claus. Tom's daughter Hillary used to work for us in Seattle, and I miss her every day. I saw her last week. She told me that she has her hands full with your grandchildren, but that she's hoping someday she'll come back to us. I hope so too.
My question or comment is, I think in almost every instance of work that you and your firm have, there is a very, very strong hand in the tiniest details. You may have noticed a little bit on the Teton Center, the bracket that supports the tower, that it goes beyond that. You cannot look any place in one of their buildings where the architects haven't thought about the detail of connection or the detail of two materials joining. But maybe just add to that part of your philosophy.
Well, I was thinking that it's kind of like, you guys know who Todd Williams and Billy Chen are, right? If you don't, there's a problem. They were just selected to design the Obama Presidential Library, so you gotta know them if you don't know them. But they often talk about that they make slow architecture, right? It takes a long time to do what they do, and some of it is tied up in that, Tom, that it takes time and care to develop those details. And even on projects with modest budgets, you can take great care in how materials come together. But that's a great interest of ours. You know, I think it comes from wanting to reveal the nature of things and wanting to reveal how things are made and not just slap them together. I think that's important. And in some cases, not all architects are super concerned about that, which I think is okay, but we are concerned about that, about how buildings are made and crafted and how they reveal how they're made. It's kind of interesting. And for us, you mentioned Tetons. You know, we were working for the federal government. They are not the most sympathetic people, and really, they're not. And it was tough to achieve that level of detail on a project like that. And thankfully, there was a foundation that was providing a lot of the funding for the building who stood up for us and argued that we were not just making a typical building, we were making a frontier building, and they had to respect that, but it took time. So sometimes you have clients who stand up for you in those instances, and sometimes you have to stand up for yourself.
I think on that beautiful note, can we all just want to give a It's inspiring. As aspiring architects, if you're not in